Fart, right? Does the bus fart? Yes, every time I pull the parking, and I think it sharks too because there's water that comes out of the bottom of. It's terrible. I don't like this bus. It's dirty. It's awful. I don't get it. But the point is that the air is exhausted from that canister and the spring expands so that the bus does not move. Okay? What holds your bus together is the spring expanded. Lack of air expands the air. Your physical hand pops, and all of a sudden the spring expands and the bus will not move. It's now parked. Make sense? Parking brake is only to be used for parking purposes. If you read it, all right? If you read what that yellow knob says, it says what? Parking brake. Why? And I'm not saying anybody in here does that, okay? Why do we call this the emergency stopping system? Because it stops the bus? Yeah. But does this stop the bus while I'm driving down the roadway when this right here doesn't work? No. A dual air brake system, a 121, FMVS says, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 121, 571121, states that the emergency stopping system shall be of that type that allows for the modulation of the emergency stopping system through the treadle valve being the service brake being the service brake pedal. The emergency stopping system must activate with you modulating the foot. That's what you do when you want to stop the bus. Okay? Stop thinking that this is going to be used for an emergency. Okay? There are some scenarios that I might talk about where you might have to use that. Okay? But not 99.9% of the time. There's only one time that I had to use this instead of this, and it was not because the braking system was not working. When you apply this brake, it applies all brakes under normal condition. Okay? Front and rear system, primary rear, secondary, the front system will activate when you apply the service brake. When you pull the parking brake, only the rear brakes apply. And it's all or nothing with this little pop-out thing, right? This pop-up thing, that, what do we call that thing? Parking brake. Some people call it a PP valve. What's so funny? PP, right? Why do we call it a PP? Is it because when you pull the park? No, we talked about flatulence, right? No. Why do they call it a PP valve? Because it's yellow? Wow, what you been drinking? You some cranberry juice, man. Yellow. Yeah, it's bright neon yellow. No, they call it a PP valve because it's a push and pull valve. Push and pull valve. No, it has nothing to do with your PP. Okay? You got it? Makes sense? All right, what was I talking about anyway? We got into going to the bathroom and the color. Terrible. All right, so again, has anybody learned anything yet? Raise your hand if you have not learned anything yet. Raise your hand. And I know that some of you didn't know that parking brake actually went to the bathroom. No. All right, so when it comes down to it, you have one situation, all right? All or nothing here, but this is only applying the rear, right? So if you pull it all, the bus is going to come more than likely to a smooth stop unless you're going really, really slow, unless it's raining. If it rains and you pull it, your wheels are going to lock, all right? Be very careful with using a parking brake or using a parking brake ever to slow the vehicle down. The only reason why I would use the parking brake to slow down is because I don't want my front brakes to break. And why would I not want my front brakes to break in any emergency situation? How about I get a flat tire in the front tire and I'm going 55 miles an hour in a rural road where it's just wide enough for the bus, and there is nothing but dirt and gravel, and then all of a sudden, there's a little bit of water over on the other side that we use for farming. So if I step on the brake and I have a flat tire, more than likely when I brake, the bus is going to pull in that direction. Okay? So I have to have the intelligence, the know-how, and the understanding of what I'm going to do under this situation. Now, if I brake lightly, nothing's going to happen. You're going to be able to slow the vehicle down or just come off of the accelerator. Don't even use the brake. But I'm coming to a stop sign. The tire blows. There's a horse crossing right in front of me in about 200 feet. I need to slow down and stop, or at least slow the vehicle down. How do I brake without affecting the front of the vehicle to the left or to the right? That would be pulling the parking brake, pushing it in. Pulling the parking brake, get some braking power, push it in. Pull the parking brake, push it in. Controlled braking through modulation with the parking brake. But that takes practice. You have to be able to, boom, right now, think about what you're going to do and be able to do it safely without causing more damage to the vehicle or something that might be unsafe to those kids. Does that make sense? Other than that, leave the parking brake alone. Only when you park and when you're leaving from a park location. Does that make sense? Parking brake is located where? In the back of the bus. All right? What stops the vehicle in a 121 system is the spring expanding due to lack of air. I need you to remember that. Because one day, your service brake, we'll also call it the primary system or green system, will fail. And when that green system fails, there's only orange left to stop the bus. Right? How in the world am I going to get the rear emergency stopping system to work when it works opposite of your primary or service brake system? The service brake system requires air to stop the bus. The air goes in the pods, it moves the moving parts in there, and it stops the vehicle. Right? There's no air in that system. So we have to use a separate system so that we can stop the bus. And that separate system is your emergency stopping system / parking brake system. I need to take out air from the brake pot to apply the brake with spring power using the service brake. Now, I don't know about you, but how are you going to get out there with the wrenches, right? And try to reroute the air from this to that, and you don't even know where you're going to get air because I need to put air in the spring brake pot and then take the air out. Where am I going to get the air if there's no air in the rear? Well, there's only one tank that works, and that's the front tank. So how am I going to get the air from the front tank to go all the way over to the rear so that I can put air in the spring brake pot so it can do this, smash it while I'm applying the brake, and then release the air when I release the service brake? So when it comes down to it, I apply the brake, air goes into the front. When I apply the brake under emergency systems and the rear system doesn't work, it exhausts air from the brake pod. So we'll talk about how that works so that you can understand it. And really the beauty of the whole system is that you absolutely don't have to do anything to it. All you have to do to stop the bus is brake. Service brake. That's it. It's going to sound funny. It's going to sound like flatulence. It's going to sound like air is exhausting when you step on the service brake. And if any of you, raise your hand if you split the tanks when you do an air brake test. Raise your hand. All right, for those of you that split the tanks, when you dump the air out of the rear tank and you move the vehicle forward and apply the brake, you hear like you're pulling the parking brake when you step on the service brake. That's the spring brake control valve. We'll talk about what that is. It's taking the air out of that spring brake pod in the back, exhausting it so that we get brake in the rear as well as in the front. All right? Make sense? Spring brake control valve. We call it the brain of the system. All right, so here we go. Anybody seen this program before? Dual air brake system, I mean, it had to have been taught to you as an original applicant, right? I'm sure, and if it wasn't, we're going to teach it today. Not in its entirety, because I don't have enough time, but here we go. Let me talk to you a little bit about prior systems that existed before this 121 system. An automatic actuated system. This is a system, if the system had a leak or a total loss in the service site, it had one tank, okay? One tank, and that is it. That's all it had. If it lost air in that tank, there was nothing left. The system had an emergency stopping system that automatically actuated the air brake. Automatic actuation of the emergency stopping system, meaning that the bus stops by itself once it can't stop with the service brake. Does that make sense? Isn't that kind of easy? That's kind of cool, right? Because I don't have to do anything, all right? A monkey can drive the bus, pull the air out, and the bus stops by itself, right? Not to say that anybody here is a monkey, but if you were, you wouldn't have to do anything. It does it by itself. It's really, really easy, all right? So a separate emergency tank would be used to release the brake and allow the driver to move the vehicle to a safe location. You can still do that with a 121 system, a dual air brake system. Have a separate tank, because once you lose air in the front and the rear tanks, it's gonna automatically actuate just like this right here. And what will happen is that you can't move the bus anymore. And you're in the middle of a road, 55 miles an hour, logging trucks, cattle trucks, pig trucks, hay trucks, I don't care. They're coming right behind you and the bus is stuck in the middle of the road. Nothing you can do that unless we cage the springs or somehow patch the air leak, at least have one tank, and then we would be able to push in the parking brake and move the vehicle forward. Well, these systems had a separate tank, separate from the service brake system, which would allow you to push in that valve. Notice that it's not yellow, all right? It's a black valve, or it was a green valve, or I've never seen the reds, but I've seen greens and blacks. So you were required to push in the valve, but keep pushing it in. If you did not add force to it, it would automatically stop again. So you push it in, you drive the vehicle over to a safe location. As soon as you release it, boom, the springs are locked up again, you can't move the bus. Cannot do that in a 121 system unless you retrofit that valve into that bus. But back in those days, a single system, one tank for the service brakes, might have an automatic actuated system, and it would have a separate valve that would allow you to move the bus to a safe location. Does that make sense? All right, excellent. Modulated air brake system may be identified by a manual valve on the dash or a twist lever located on the left side of the driver's compartment. So if it had a system leak, total loss of air in the service brake, it had one tank again for the service brake, the brake pedal that you use. If you lost that air, then you had an emergency stopping system. Here's the problem with this emergency stopping system. It required that you do something to stop the bus other than stepping on the brake. Now, have you ever in your life done anything other than step on the service brake to stop your vehicle? Very few people. I know some of you guys probably in high school, you'd like to pull parking to stop the vehicle. Yeah, you can't do that, right? It's not safe. It's not designed for that. But 99% of you will stop the vehicle by using the service brake. This system required that you do something else, that you put your hand on a lever or a handle to stop the bus if this didn't work. What do you think your natural reaction is going to be when, let's just say for whatever reason and whatever it is that you drive, this right here doesn't work? What do you think you're going to do next? You're going to step on that service brake once again, because you are not going to believe that this day is that bad for you. Yes, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to step on the brake again. And guess what? When you step on it the second time, you're going to be like, OMG, this cannot be happening to me, right? I'm going to go ahead and step on the brake again. But this time, I'm going to step on it as hard as I can, because my strength and will stop this bus. Absolutely it will. And you will step on it again, not just with one foot, but you actually didn't tell anybody, you actually have 3 feet. You're going to use 3 feet to stop the bus. All right? You're going to step on the brake to stop the bus. Yeah, it's not going to happen. It's not going to stop. There's a reason why this vehicle is not stopping. And it's not going to be, in most cases, 99% of the time, a dual air brake system, because it's always going to stop if you check the vehicle correctly. So this usually happens with hydraulic brake systems, right? You lose the hydraulic system and you don't have brakes. You're going to have to push really, really hard to stop the vehicle. And most vehicles, especially vehicles that are heavy, they'll put an electrical motor, a backup motor, and that is going to work in lieu of the hydraulic system, which is going to give you the power to stop the vehicle. That's if you checked it in the morning, right? That little thing when you turn the key and it sounds like a little motor is going, if you ever seen one before, and then you step on it, that is your emergency stopping system. Just in case you didn't know, it is very important that it works when your brakes go out, if it's a hydraulic brake system. But what if it's your car, right? Your car you're going to be in big trouble. You step on the brake and the vehicle is going faster. That means you're stepping on the accelerator. Yes, you're stepping on the accelerator. Have you ever seen that? Especially at my favorite donut shop, right? Why does it have to be my donut shop that gets run into in the morning by someone who says the brakes failed going 50 miles an hour, right? Yeah, right. You're in the parking lot going 55 miles an hour, right? Yeah, I get it. If it was the freeway, I get it. But you're in the parking lot going 55 miles an hour. Sir, ma'am, you step on the accelerator and you could not believe how bad of a day you were having, so you use your 3 feet to stop the vehicle using the accelerator. That's exactly what's going on. People get confused, they get scared, they're not trained, they don't understand the positioning of their body, and they step on the wrong pedal. All right? It happens 99% of the time. It's not the brake system that's failing. More than likely, it's going to be driver error. All right? So this automatic actuation does not exist on this modulated system. It requires that you use your hand to stop the bus. Bad idea. Because back in those days, there were no training requirements for school bus drivers. You did not have to go through that really boring class. You did not have to get tested by that really mean CHP officer in the back that looks at you funny when you're tested. I don't think he likes me. He doesn't even know you. He doesn't care what's going on. All he cares is that he sees what he's dreamed of seeing his whole life, and that is a professional school bus driver every single time he tests or she tests. Right? That's all they want. That's it. But no, what's the big deal, man? I mean, it's like, so I missed the cut in and the cut out, right? What's the big deal about that? What's the big deal about the static test? Who cares if it's 3, 4, 5, 7, 10? Who cares? Who cares? It doesn't matter, right? What matters? It matters. It's called safety, right? And why would you want to put yourself in a 26,000-pound vehicle without brakes? What is wrong with you? You are suicidal, all right? You're crazy, right? He's not failing you because you don't know what to do. It's because you're crazy. All right, so the driver will be required to manually apply the modulated system, or also known as the emergency stopping system. Remember, automatic actuated, modulated system will create a dream system. This is a system that you are using today, a modulated system and an automatic actuated system is called the 121 system. And we'll talk about why it's like that. Anybody remember these up here? They're on the dash. You've been here long enough? Somebody have an old bus? No? Well, that's what the, yes, Jennifer, you've been here for what, 75 years? She just won't go away. I don't know why. She just sticks around. She was here when the horses actually ate hay. You know, like they said, hey, have you fed the horses yet? We got to drive that route tomorrow. Yeah.
He is funny.
She ages very well, though. Look at her. She's beautiful. Like, look at that. 102 years old. Oldest woman in Kern County. Driving a bus.
He's James.
Driving a bus. They shouldn't let you. All right. All right, so anybody hear of the Martinez accident up in Northern California? Yes. The reason why you have to do all this boring stuff and all this stuff in the morning, you heard it in the morning, you hear it every time you get to the yard, right? Right? It's like if you're Mexican, you know what the zapateado is. Yeah. All right, I like those drivers because I know they can dance, right? I want to dance with you. Why are you doing that? I want to know who would beat up someone for fun or something, because that's exactly what you're doing. You are beating up a diaphragm, all right? Think about that. If you are pounding on a diaphragm, what do you think can happen? It won't break, right? It's going to leak and it won't break. Why are you laughing? What's so funny? You're pounding on a diaphragm. Eventually, this metal part, it's a hand, right, that's hitting the diaphragm. You're causing friction. And what happens when you cause friction? Eventually, that diaphragm made out of rubber will break. And when it breaks, you're going to leak. And when you leak, that's a bad thing, especially if you don't check your brakes correctly. So do not pound on the diaphragm. It's a bad thing. All right? Make sense? No good. All right? For those of you that don't have rhythm, I want to party with that driver too. You got rhythm. Yeah, I like it, right? Take your time. Stop being so aggressive. Relax. So at 10:55 a.m. on May 21st, 1976, a charter bus carrying 52 passengers struck and mounted a section of the bridge rail system in the Marina Vista off-ramp off I-680 near Martinez, California. The bus rose off the top of the curb bridge rail and lands on its roof. There were 29 occupants on that bus. This looks like a school bus, but it was not a school bus at that point in time. 29 occupants died, and the rest sustained minor to serious injuries. So Marina exit, if you go down towards San Francisco, you can go to Martinez and actually see this. It doesn't look exactly like that anymore, but it's very close to it. It's not as curvy. It's a little bit rounder now because of this accident. I want you to notice what the speed limit says. If you can see, it says 20 miles an hour, right? There is a specific color. This color is what color? I'm colorblind. What is it?
Yellow.
Yellow? All right, so it looks gray to me. But yellow means what? Caution. Go faster. Who said that? Yellow means go faster. Stop it. No, it means caution. Hey, slow down. Precautionary speed. Not illegal speed until you violate the basic speed law. Going too fast for the conditions of the road or the weather, all that good stuff. When you get a speeding ticket, that's the ticket that you're going to get because it's a catch-all ticket, right? You had an accident. It was raining. You were going too fast. No way. I was going 20 miles an hour. So how'd you just get out of control and hit that car? I don't know, but I was going 20 miles an hour. Good for you. You were going too fast, right? You violated the basic speed law. So it's easy to catch you on that. So obviously, if you have an accident and you're going too fast, faster than what's recommended because of the curvature, then more than likely you're going to be at fault by violating that basic speed law. All right? So 20 miles an hour. The bus hits the rail, mounts the rail, rides the rail, and then comes and succumbs to the centrifugal force, ends up falling down on its roof. And when it falls on its roof, it is now laying on I want you to think about that bus. It was a very old bus. It had low back seats. Just like this right here, what you're sitting on is a low back seat, okay? I want you to think about the high school kids that were sitting in that seat. The roof is on the top portion of the high back seat. So you want to know why some of these kids passed away with this accident? Was because the roof caved in, and it caved into the seat, and the only portion where the kids were actually safe or had a safe space was between the seat and the floor. All right, very small area. You know what high school kids look like today, right? I'm sure they were pretty similar back in those days, although there weren't that many McDonald's back then, so I don't know. But when it comes down to it, I think we've kept our sizes pretty equal our whole time. Although I heard a story this week that our kids are taller, skinnier, but less strong for some reason. And it might be because of Fortnite. You know what Fortnite is? Well, there's a lot of people laughing in here, so you do know what Fortnite is. Yeah. Well, that's what it is. Your fingers are bigger because they need to get to the buttons, right? So I don't know. It's weird. We're supposed to have, like, in 20 years, like a bigger head, bigger eyes, and we're going to turn green or something. That's what they were talking about. But needless to say, what happened here is that back in those days, our buses weren't as strong as they are today. Now our buses have rollover bars. You don't get to see them unless you take a bus apart. But the rollover bars are on top of it. They have very strong steel braces on the side to hold the integrity of the roof. And hopefully, who knows? I mean, if we drop a bus that high, more than 20 to 30 feet, maybe it'll cave in, but it might not cave in completely because we have all those roll-up bars and as well as braces throughout the whole top of the bus. So it's supposed to bring the bus over to its side if it ever rolls over. That's the design of that bus. We don't want the bus on the roof. We want it on its side. So just to show you what that bus looks like, right now, those kids are actually sitting somewhere in here. Now, the biggest problem is that the emergency responders have never had this situation happen before, ever, anywhere in history. So, fire department, CHP, local law enforcement, I mean, you had everybody there trying to help out, but they couldn't get these kids out. They started making holes all over the bus to find the kids. Anybody know what that used to be on the ground? That hole that's right there? They call it a boot. Right? They call it a boot because that was a section where we actually put our luggage and our freight and anything that we were transporting. It was in the back of the bus. So they're making holes everywhere they can to get to the students. And as you all know, if you've had a class on how time matters when it comes down to saving someone's life, minutes and hours pass, and some of these kids succumb to their injuries because we couldn't get to them fast enough. All right? So all kinds of things were learned from this accident. The first thing, the driver was not required to be trained on the air brake system. The driver was not required to understand or be proficient in the vehicle that they drive before they drive the vehicle unsupervised. So this vehicle had a modulated system. A modulated system, meaning when your service brake goes away and there's nothing here, the driver has to use their hand to stop the vehicle, right? Whether it's on the dash, this one happened to be on the steering column that he had to pull to stop the vehicle. So, has a leak in the system. The driver is told that the bus leaks oil. So eventually there's going to be a light buzzer that's going to go off. And when it goes off, all you have to do is pull over, go to the boot, and get those gallons of oil that we left in the boot. Now that's hazardous materials, right? How often do you get to carry those on a school bus? Well, that's right, that's illegal, right? Well, not then. Heck, you can bring fuel, oil. Hey, we can have an oil party for all I care in a school bus. It was completely legal, but because it had such a bad oil leak, guess what? All you have to do is put some oil in it, and then that bus is going to go away. The driver's driving down the roadway, stepping on the brake, there's traffic, all of a sudden you're using too much air and it has a leak, and then light buzzer goes off, right? When it goes off, what's the driver thinking? Oil leak, right? Pull the bus over to a safe location, put some oil in it, leaves the bus running with kids on the bus. Bus running, kids on the bus, right? No longer using the service brake. So now the leak it's not overpowering the braking and the lead, so it has time to build up, so the lower warning device no longer stays on as the pressure goes back up. This is a single layer system. This is a system that had to have the lower warning device come on no lower than 75, actually between 75 and 55 PSI, if you remember that. So it came on, but if the driver leaves the bus running with the kids on the bus, eventually it's going to go over 75 PSI and no warning device is going to be on anymore. Puts the oil in, keeps driving, starts getting closer to Martinez, boom! Once again, the lower warning device comes on, but he's thinking it's the low oil pressure warning device. You know what that is? When you turn the key in the on position and you have a buzzer go off, that's exactly what that is. If you turn the key and it doesn't go off, something's wrong with your bus. You have no low oil pressure warning device. It might be very subtle, but pay attention to it. When you start the bus and you have compression in the engine, right? It's going to go off and the light's going to go off. It's going to be pretty quick, right? But if you lose engine pressure or oil pressure, that warning device is supposed to come on. Sometimes it's the same sound as your lower warning device. So be very careful with that depending on how old your bus is. So the driver loses the air, doesn't pull over, he's almost there, continues to lose air. And as you start reducing the volume of air in the single system, you start losing the capability. Remember I said 100 PSI? Don't move the bus unless you have 100 PSI. What do you think is going to happen if you're at 50 PSI? You think everything's going to work the way it's supposed to? Probably not, right? You don't have enough air. Have you ever been pulled over for a DUI and have to blow into that little thing? No way. Why'd you look away? Oh, don't look at me. Oh, that was a long time ago. No, that was my sister. It wasn't me drinking, and it made me blow into the... No, absolutely not. Now, well, you've gone to do a drug test, and it's an alcohol test too, right? I hate that test. Because blow, keep blowing, keep blowing. Are you kidding me? What do you think my lungs are about? I don't have balloons for lungs. I can't blow that long, right? So when it comes down to it, if you don't have enough power or air in the system, you're not going to be able to pass that test. You're not going to be able to move those mechanical parts, right? So he steps on the brake, the bus does not stop. This is a standard transmission. He's going over about 55 miles an hour. Now, if you've ever driven a bus with a standard transmission, it has a clutch brake. Anybody know what a clutch brake is? Yeah, so it stops a set of gears from moving so that I can put it into gear, especially on an unsynchronized transmission. So this driver could have downshifted this bus to slow the vehicle down. From fifth to fourth, slows the vehicle down fourth to third, slows the vehicle down third to second, and now we should be able to traverse this curve without a problem. Was never trained on double clutching, using the clutch brake, or having a situation where if the bus doesn't stop, use the transmission to slow you down. At least a little bit slower might have given him control of that vehicle. So he steps on the brake. The bus does not stop, steps on the brake again, the bus does not stop, he doesn't understand what's going on. He has a full tank on the emergency stopping system, and all he has to do is pull the lever to stop the bus. Doesn't know, not required to know. Doesn't know, not required to know. The reason why you're so safe in the state of California is because you are required to know. And you are required to know everything about that bus, power and gradability, brake system, other secondary braking systems like the retarders. You're required to know about the wheelchair lifts and how to tie down. Everything on that bus you must be proficient on before you can drive that vehicle unsupervised out there on the road. Even if you pass the test with CHB, if you're not proficient in the vehicle and how to drive this vehicle, you cannot drive the vehicle alone. Does that make sense? So why does that happen? Because we killed 29 people. Proficiency was required after April 1st, 1977. SPAB. You ever heard of a SPAB bus? The ones that take your work, right? When you do an activity trip, the really pretty ones with air conditioning and TVs and really nice fresheners. inside, and they have a bathroom with a massage, right? You hit this button and water flushes upward for some reason. No toilet paper. What does it call it? Duvet or yesterday, something like that. I don't remember what happened yesterday. But when it comes down to it, SPAB was created. Proficiency was required, Title 13, Section 1229, right? We just heard that in the last class. And last but not least, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 571-121 was created. That means that you have to have a bus that has a system, a backup system, and an emergency stopping system. So you have a primary system for your rear brakes, a secondary system for your front brakes, and an emergency stopping system in case something happens to one or the other. No matter what happens, what you need to know out of this class is step on the service brake and the bus is going to stop. Got it? All right. So it's comprised of 4 systems in one. You have a charging, which is your charging system, which is the blue system. You have a secondary system, which is your front or red system. You have a primary system, which is your green or rear system. And last but not least, your parking brake emergency stopping system, which is your orange system. Again, if you look under the bus, you will not see these colors. It's probably going to be full of gunk and stuff back there, and you're not going to be able to see. More than likely, everything's going to be gray. All right? So, let's talk about the blue or the supply system. This supply system supplies the air to your primary and secondary system, front and rear tanks, okay? This supply system was also known back in the days as the wet tank. Remember that? That supply tank was the wet tank. What's in the blue system? You have a compressor, you have a governor, you have an air dryer 99% of the time, right? And you have a supply reservoir. Right? So compressor, governor, air dryer, supply reservoir. This used to be called a wet tank. All right? You called it a wet tank because what did it do at the end of the day when you opened it? It has some nasty poop and gunk coming out of it, right? That should not be happening with your supply tank. It is not a wet tank. If it is wet, ask your mechanic, do I have an air dryer? If you don't want to ask the mechanic and you want to find out if your bus has an air dryer, wait until the air governor cuts out. And at the end of the air governor cut out, you will hear what? Flatulence. Yes, very good. That is the air dryer exhausting all the gunk and extra stuff out of the system before it sends it somewhere else. So this air dryer is doing that work. You know you have an air dryer, you're not going to have a wet tank. Does that make sense? If you have a wet tank and you have an air dryer, let your mechanic know every day at least dump the air out of the supply tank. If you don't do that, you don't know what's going on in your blue system. You got it? If it's leaking, you can see oil, you can see gasoline, you can see coolant in there. You see all those things because things can bleed into your compressor. Your compressor is hooked up to the engine. 99% of the time it's using the cooling system and the lubricated system or your oil to work. So at one point in time, the gaskets go out and they can start bleeding into your air brake system. Where do you find it? In this blue tank right here, the supply tank. Got it? Dump your supply tank. Just air should come out of it. Sometimes a little bit of moisture, but not a whole lot. If it's gunking and you can see it on the ground, write it up. Something's wrong with my air dryer. Now the mechanic's going to be kind of angry at you because it's like, who do you think you are to tell me that you think it's the air dryer? Well, right. What else would be causing water or gunk getting in there? Obviously, the cartridge inside the air dryer is not doing the work. So it's getting to my tank, right? Bam! What about that? Of course, the mechanic's like, whatever. I'm not going to fix it. I'm just telling you something wrong with it. All right, the red tank, that's your front axle or your secondary tank. You're going to have the supply tank, the front tank. There's going to be a little valve right there called a safety valve. Anybody know what a safety valve is? It's so that, what happens to a balloon when you blow into it? Pops, right? What do you think is going to happen to your tank if you don't have a safety valve? It doesn't blow up when your governor doesn't work, because it will fail at one point in time. It will not cut off at no more than 130 psi. It could go all the way up until blow up time. The safety valve is designed so that it will expel the air out of the system at 150 psi. All right? How do you test it? You've got to stop the governor from working, right? How do you test it? You don't. You see 131 psi, what do you think I'm doing? I'm going to be pulling the bus over to a safe location, doing another brake inspection, calling it in. I need a mechanic. Something's wrong with my air governor. It's cutting out more than 130 psi, right? 135, 145. Why is it getting that high, right? That's kind of scary. At 150, that valve is supposed to expel. And it resets. If it does go off one day, for whatever reason, the governor doesn't work, air will exhaust to a safe level, and then it will shut again. So it should work over and over again. And if it doesn't, then the mechanic will change it. Easy fix. All right, same thing with the primary tank. It's the green tank. You're going to have the supply reservoir, so it's supplying to the red and the green. You're going to have a safety valve. You have a drain cock there. You have the lower warning device that's set up more than likely, depending on the type of bus, either in that tank, on the supply tank, or your gauges themselves. The orange system is the parking brake. Now this is the brake pod, all right, or the brake chamber. Green is for the service brake. Air is required to go in there to move this right here, that push rod that moves the slack adjuster that's connected to the whole system so that we can apply the brakes. So the only way that I can get this thing right here to move, if this doesn't work, is the spring in here has to expand to move that. And something has to control it. Either the valve when I pull the parking brake, or the service brake when I apply it, and a very, very important system or valve which is called a spring brake control valve. That's exactly what allows that to happen. And of course, your parking brake system has a valve. And what does it say? Parking brake. Does it say emergency stopping system? Emergency brake? Is it red? No. So don't use it as an emergency brake. Use your service brake. All right, compressors. There's two types of compressors. You're either going to have a gear-driven compressor or a belt-driven compressor. This will be connected to some gears in the engine. This will be connected to a pulley, and that pulley is connected to like a fan belt, and the fan belt's connected to isn't that a song? Fan belt connected to wish. Oh, that's another song. But basically, you'll see your compressor, and you'll see a pulley, and you see a valve. That's pretty much how that turns on. The compressor's on at all times when the bus is running. Okay? The compressor's on at all times when the bus is running. So if your governor fails and it continues to build air, how do you stop the governor? Shut the engine off. Really easy. Turn it off, and it will stop. And you're screaming and yelling, it's gonna blow, it's gonna blow. And it's not gonna blow. You have a safety valve. It's gonna be fine. All right. All right, the governor. What does the governor do? He passes the child checkmate law and the child these things that were supposed to cost $100, and now they cost $3,000 to install on your bus. Now, not only do I have to do that, but I have to burn calories to go to the back to hit this little button, right? Hit this little button. That's what the governor does, right? No, the governor just signed it. It was the legislature that did that. But the governor that we're talking about governs the cut in and the cut out. You have governors everywhere in your life, all right? Some of you are married to them. Yes. Yeah. Terrible. Yeah. No, this is not. It's not. You're not the governor. I'm the governess. All right. So when it comes up to it, it governs something. It turns on, turns off, turns on, turns off. Air conditioning, that has a governor. It's called thermostat, right? Your cooling system has a thermostat. It's a governor. Cut in, cut out. It turns the fan on or allows water to go from one section of your cooling system to another section so that it maintains a certain temperature to drive the vehicle. Governors are everywhere in your life. It governs or controls the cut in and cut out. All right? Very simple. It should cut in no lower than 85 psi, and the only way to get to that point is to apply the service brake. all right? Or if you are dumping the air with a valve or push knob, then you can actually touch that knob and dump the air to find out where that governor comes on. It should turn on no lower than 85 psi. 99% of the time, about 100, 102 psi. Why do you think the governor turns on at 100 psi? Didn't I say that you had to have at least 100 pounds to move the bus? Wouldn't it make sense that a system would know that? Right? So the system's smart. It's like your phone. It knows everything. Everything that you don't know, you just say, hey, what about this, Google? Bam. Or Cortana, or whatever else. Siri, have you ever said, are you serious? And your iPhone's right next to you? Right? Are you serious? Yes, how can I help you? Shut up, not you. I just can't believe this is happening. It scares the crap out of me at night because the news will say, serious, and she answers, yes, can I help you? I'm like, hey, there's another woman in my bedroom. My wife gets mad at me. It's like, what do you mean? You're talking while you're sleeping. No, I swear. She said, may I help you? And it wasn't you. I get in trouble all the time. So, governor, it governs, okay? The air dry is very simple, all right? The air is used from the atmosphere, right? The compressor is using air from the atmosphere, and it is sucking the air from the atmosphere. It's also sucking all the nasty, gunky stuff that's in the air, right? That's killing people, that's giving you cancer, all that good stuff. All that stuff is going into this air dryer. It is absorbing all that stuff, the moisture in the gun, so it doesn't go into the brake system, all right? So it removes moisture and contaminants from the entire system. The air dryer's job is to cool, because the air does get warm, because it's a little engine, that compressor's building that air. It cleans and it dries the air to ensure efficiency in the dual air brake system. Pretty simple. All right? Supply reservoir is in the blue. That is basically taking the air from the blue system, brings it into the center, and it pushes it out to your front and rear tank. All right? So if you're going to drain anything, drain that one. You drain that supply system, it will tell you that something's wrong in the charging system or blue system if there's gunk or liquid coming out of it. When you come to the rear tank or the front tank, you're going to have a valve called a one-way check valve. A one-way check valve. Okay, this one-way check valve allows air to go in one direction only. Does that make sense? Have you ever been on a one-way street? What happens if you go the wrong way on a one-way street? You crash, right? You can crash into something. Have you ever seen someone getting on the freeway going the wrong way? That's a one-way system, all right? It doesn't work two ways. It only works one way. This is a one-way system. It allows air to go into the tank, okay? Notice that it has a little spring on the inside. It has a little seal made out of rubber. When you push the air or the governor cuts in, it's pushing the air from the compressor into the system. As soon as the air governor cuts out, the air inside the tank pushes this way as well as the little spring to keep the air in your front and rear tank. Okay? Does that make sense? How do I know that the one-way check valve is not working? Does anybody know how to check the one-way check valve? Anybody? Okay. Remember I told you that this tank right here supplies the air to the front and the rear, right? Dump the air out of this one. If any gauge is moving, if one gauge moves, and it's the rear gauge, then guess what? Your rear one-way check valve is not working, all right? What happens when your rear one-way check valve doesn't work? You what? Well, air is going to leak out of it, right? You're going to have air leakage. You'll see it on the static and the applied, but the easiest way to check your one-way check valve is to dump the air out of the supply tank. Any tank moves, front or rear, whichever one moves, the one-way check valve is not working. Make sense? If they both move and only one's bad, not only your one-way check valve is not working, your two-way check valve is not working. All right? Dump the supply, and it will tell you if your check valves are not working. Is that required for you to check? Not at all. You are not required to check the one-way check valve. You are not required to check the two-way check valve. You are not required by law to check the emergency stopping system. What the? for that because Title 13, Section 12, anybody know? 1215 states that when you check the air brake system, splitting the tanks are not required. Okay? The only way to check the emergency stopping system is by splitting the tanks. The only way to check the one-way check valve is by dumping the air out of the supply. Not required. You're not a mechanic. Only the mechanic's required to split the tanks to find out if your system's working. That's what they do on your 45-day, 3,000-mile inspection and anytime they check your brakes. All right? But can you check it just to know? Yep. Dump the supply and it will tell you all kinds of things about things that you can't check while you're doing your brake inspection. Make sense? So if you can't split the tanks, at least dump the supply, look at your gauges. The front and rear gauges should not move. They should stay put, all right? Only one exception, and that is if you have a different air dryer, I think it's called an ADS9 or something like that, you're gonna have pressure protection valves. You're not gonna have single check valves. So what it'll do is both of them will dump to 100 PSI, and then they'll stay at 100 PSI. That's it. All right, so if that's what's going on, talk to your mechanic about it. Got it? And that, I think it's Bluebirds at one point in time had that air dryer. All right, so in the tank as well, you're gonna have a lower warning device. The lower warning device on a 121 system is required to activate no lower than what? 60 PSI. That's it, 60 PSI and all pressures below 60. Any question about that? Now, when I say all pressures below 60, by law, you're not required to go lower than 60 or where the lower warning device comes on. All you're required to do is check the lower warning device and then go right into the parking brake test, right? Unless you split the tanks. If you split the tanks and you're checking the one-way check valve, the two-way check valve, the spring brake control valve, dumping it all the way down, you're also checking the lower warning device that stays on at all pressures below 60 PSI. Not required by regulation in the state. But, funny that we say this, there is a vehicle code that states that the driver must understand the application and release of the emergency stopping system. So if you have an accident and it was your brakes that caused it, I'd be darned if I'm not going to be a witness for someone who is suing you to say, by law, that person should know how the emergency stopping system works. And I know I taught you to split the tanks and dump the supply to make sure that everything was working, right? But not required when it comes to your inspection. It is, eventually, it could be something civilly that you have to deal with. All right. Green has the same thing as the red. It's going to have the safety valve. It's going to have the lower warning device switch on this type of vehicle. It could be lower, could be here, or it could be on the gauges themselves. Double check valve. The double check valve is like your middle linebacker. I am so glad that football's back. The middle linebacker is the one that is going to make sure that if there's a weak side, it's going to cover the weak side. All right? So if the rear tank leaks, it's going to slide over to the rear tank and seal it. All right? The front tank's going to be fine. If the front tank is leaking, it's sitting in the middle, it goes to the weak side and it will seal the weak side. If the double check valve doesn't work correctly, both tanks will leak. Does that make sense? All right, so what does it look like? It looks pretty simple. This is what it's doing all day long. It's sitting right in the middle, right? But if you have a leak in the front, slides over to the front. If you have a leak in the rear, it'll slide over to the rear. The park control valve is pretty simple. It's a yellow knob that you pull and you push. When you pull the air out, it will exhaust the spring. When you push the knob in, you will hear it. It goes inside the canister to compress the spring and it allows you to move the bus. Make sense? All right. Relay valve. Relay valve is basically a service brake in the back of the bus. It allows you to apply the brake in the back immediately when you apply the brake in the front. All right, that relay valve takes the air from the rear tank and it puts it right into the rear brake chamber. That's what it does. It senses that you're applying the brake. It shoots a little burst of air to the back, and it takes the air from the back of the tank and puts it right into the rear tank. If not, it would have to go from the pedal all the way to the back, and the rear brakes have to apply. Now, what happens when your rear brakes apply before your front brakes? Think about a bicycle. Anybody ride a bike? Now put your front brakes on first. What's going to happen? You're not going to have any teeth, right? It is what it is. So when it comes down to it, your rear brakes have to work. Did you ever own a bike, right, that didn't have brakes? Right? How about at one point in time when it got better, it ended up with rear brakes. At one point in time, commercial vehicles only had rear brakes. If you want to have control braking and not take out your teeth, you must have rear brakes. Does that make sense? So no matter what happens, no matter what's leaking on your bus, you're going to have rear brakes. You got it? So again, that relay valve allows that the rear brakes come on first before the front brake. Make sense? How do you know it's not working? You press on the brake, it does this, and then it's okay. Well, what happened? Well, your tires are flat. No, that's not it. Bad alignment. No, that's not it, because it doesn't do it all the time. It only does it when I brake. Well, then your relay valve is not allowing those rear brakes to come on first, and it takes away control braking. Make sense? Hopefully you don't do that out on the road. Air pressure gauges, it's simple. You're either going to have one with 2 needles, one green, one red, or you're going to have 2, 1 needle apiece. That tells you that there's 2 tanks that we're servicing here. Spring brake control valve. Spring brake control valve is the brain of the operation. It is the valve that's going to allow you to use your parking brake when your rear brakes don't work. Does that make sense? What do you have to do to make it work? Nothing, other than take the air out of the rear tanks by itself, apply the brake, and listen for the sound of the parking brake applying without you applying it. That's all you have to do. Dump the rear brake system, the green. You have to separate, leave the front with air, apply the brake, and it will sound like you're pulling the parking brake. That's your spring brake control valve. If you hear that, you have an emergency stopping system. You got it? If it doesn't work, if your rear brakes do not work and only your front brakes work, think about the bicycle. That's exactly what's going to happen. You're going to lose control, and you're not going to have control braking unless that spring brake control valve works if the rear brakes go out. Make sense? Guess what? You're not required to check it. So it's up to you. If your school district doesn't require you to check it, don't worry about it. Trust your mechanic. Get out of here. My mechanic. Do you know my mechanic? I know your mechanic. They're doing the best that they can. Unfortunately, you are quality control, ladies and gentlemen. It is your life when you're driving the vehicle. If there's anything that we can do is give you information so that you're more educated about your emergency stopping system. Well, guess what? Dump the rear tank, apply the brake. It sounds like I'm pulling the brake without pulling it. Does that make sense? Try it. It's a funny feeling to hear something that you've never heard before, and I hope that you never have to hear it when driving the bus. All right? Again, the spring brake is basically your parking brake. It's in the back of the vehicle, and it's what applies the brake when you are parked or emergency stopping system. All right, so here we go. I'm going to give you a scenario. At this point in time, this is a very primitive image, but these are your wheels, okay? This is the rear of the bus because it's got the orange, and it should have green, and it should have red. But right now, the bus is driving down the roadway, and it has no air in those pods. Does that make sense? Until I apply the brake, I'm going to see red and green. Notice that the orange is orange. It's orange because when you're driving down the roadway, there is air in that canister compressing the spring because you're no longer parked. As you're driving down the roadway, there is air in the only place in that spring brake pod other than the tanks ready to give you air for your service brake. Does that make sense? Until you pull the parking brake, then this will turn white. You got it? So here we go. When I apply the service brake under normal conditions, I'm applying air, and air will go into these pods to apply brakes here, here, and that air stays in the parking brake side. Does that make sense? So no air, apply the brake, right? So you apply the brake, the bus stops. As soon as you release the service brake, what do you hear? Right? Some are funny. You ever heard that before? It sounds like a transformer. When you hear something like that, it's that quick release valve. It's not releasing the air that fast, and you might want to report that because the air is not coming out fast enough. So when you take off, it's actually still braking while you're driving. All right? So pay attention to that. So let's just say that for whatever reason, the front brakes fail. If your front brakes fail, what's going to happen? No matter what happens, ladies and gentlemen, use your service brake. Okay? No matter what happens, if you checked your bus correctly, use your service brake. The front is failing. I can hear the air exhaust. As you're driving down the roadway, what's going to happen is that valve, the two-way check valve, is sliding over to the side that's weak. You see that? It's sliding over to the side that's weak, and it's going to seal it. It's going to seal the side that's leaking. The two-way check valve will seal the side that's leaking. If your two-way check valve doesn't work, both the front and the rear will leak. You got it? Why is it important that I check my double check valve every morning? Because if one tank goes, the other one will go too, because the one system, that one valve that's going to protect the one that's still good is not working, and I didn't check it. All right? So, you step on the service brake. Remember the colors. Where do you have brakes? And you know that because it's green. Guess what? If you had a bicycle and you only had rear brakes, you think you can stop the bike? Yeah. Can you stop the bus with only rear brakes? Yeah. Is it going to stop faster with only one set of brakes? No. It's going to take a little bit longer, right? Yeah. Can you pull the bus over to a safe location with just rear brakes? Yes. Where do you have brakes? Service brake. No matter what happens, you have brakes in the rear. So here's the deal, all right? I'm not supposed to tell you this because if CHP hears this, I get in trouble, all right? When they're asking you, what happens when you lose the front brakes? Well, sir, there you go. You're going to crack your fingers, right? The double check valve is going to slide over to the side that's leaking, saving the one side that's got air. So if the front goes out, the double check valve is going to go to the front. Seal it off. I step on the service brake, and I have rear service brakes to stop. You answer that question to the CHP officer, and he might not ask you any more questions. He's probably like, where in the heck did they hear this? Someone gave him the answers to the test. Please call CDE. There's a problem here. All right, so no matter what happens, you lose one tank, right? You lose the front. Can you stop with the service brake? As long as the double check valve is working, you're going to have air in one tank. It'll allow you to stop the vehicle. Got it? Make sense? All right, here we go. What happens if the rear brakes fail? This one is serious, okay? Because rear brakes are control braking. Rear brakes I have to have. So if the rear fail, I must have rear brakes. Do you understand me? The only way I can stop the bus under controlled conditions is with rear brakes. You got it? So here we go. I lose air in the rear. I still have air in the system. I can continue to use the service brake, but it'll get to a point where it's not going to work. It's going to go to the side that's weak. The double check valve will seal the rear brakes. What's left in the back? The orange, the parking brake system. Ladies and gentlemen, the parking brake system you're required to use this way, right? But this is a 121 system, one that allows you to modulate the emergency stopping system through the treadle valve or service brake. And how does that happen? The spring brake control valve senses that your green is leaking. It knows that the green is in trouble. The rear is in trouble. It will now allow the orange to work. What it's going to do is going to dump air out of this canister. Notice that it's white now. And it applies the brake in the rear through spring force. And it applies the front through air force. Does that make sense? Normal conditions in the front. Emergency conditions in the rear. You now have braking power in the front and in the back of the bus. And this is called your emergency stopping system. The spring brake control valve, the double check valve, the service brakes is what stops the bus under an emergency condition. Does that make sense? So, the modulated operation of the emergency stopping system, stepping on the service brake when the rear brakes go out, spring brake control. Who cares? You don't even have to say spring brake control valve. There's a valve in the back that allows me to use the parking brake system through my service brake to stop the bus. Where do I have brakes? Both in the front and the rear. Control braking. You got it? Excellent. So if you wanted to check the emergency stopping system, you must dump the air in the front. Check the double check valve. It seals the front and the rear is not leaking. Dump it all the way down to 0. Move the vehicle forward, apply the brake, and you have rear brakes. Bus stops, right? You want to check the other system, let the air pressure go all the way up to the maximum. At that point in time, you're going to dump the air in the rear. You see only one tank leaking. It should only be the rear tank. The front is staying nice and put. You move the vehicle forward, apply the service brake. It sounds like you're pulling the parking brake when you press on the service brake. If you hear that, the spring brake control valve is dumping the air out of the spring side, applying the brakes through spring force, and front brakes are applied through the air in the tank. Right? Piece of cake. Modulated emergency stopping system through the treadle valve. Last but not least, this doesn't happen very often, but at one point in time you will lose air in both tanks. Remember we talked about the modulated system and then an automatic actuated system. The only way that the bus will stop by itself is if it loses air in both tanks. Doesn't happen very often. You have to have something catastrophic happen to take both tanks out. That's the reason why you have a 121 system. 2 tanks, right? So if both of them go, you're going to have braking power until the system senses that you no longer have braking power. That means that the bus needs to stop because you can't stop the vehicle safely. At 60 psi, the spring will begin to expand. At one point in time, in the life cycle of the air, it will stop the bus. That's all dependent on how fast you're going. Are you going uphill? Are you going downhill? Who knows? But the bus will stop by itself. All right? Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that are dumping the air until the spring pops out between 45 and 20, all right? That is a requirement for a tractor, trailer, or a vehicle that is towing other vehicles. Okay? It is not a requirement for a single type vehicle like a school bus. It does not have to pop out. Popping out of that yellow knob is not you knowing where the bus is going to stop. It will stop when the spring force is enough to stop the vehicle. Does that make sense? Where does that happen? I don't know. I have no idea. But I guarantee you it's going to be before that spring pops out in that little valve. Does that make sense? So both tanks go out. The bus will stop by itself. Ladies and gentlemen, the only job you have to do is to listen and pull the bus over to a safe location so that you're not stopped on the roadway itself. Does that make sense? Excellent. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about the dual air brake system? Couple of things to remember. No matter what happens in your life, you're going to stop the bus using the service brake. Right? You dump one tank, doesn't matter, you still have a service brake. If both tanks go away, the bus is going to stop by itself, and it has no choice. It has to happen because lack of air is what's going to apply that spring. Question? it pops back at you, oh. Yeah, you're gonna need an exorcist to come over to you. That is weird. It pops back. Fart, right? Just the bus fart. Yes, every time I pull the parking.